Welcome to the show, and welcome to Glow So Bright. Sighting systems have existed on firearms since the 1400s, and the first optic mounted on a firearm, or attempt to do so, in the late 1700s by an American, Charles Wilson Peale, in which he attempted to affix a telescope to the top of a musket. He then quickly became the first person to ever be documented to have scope kiss. Later on, in the 1830s, another American, John Chapman, has invented a telescopic sight for the purpose of mounting on a rifle and is robust enough to do that sort of task. Yet when we go forward in time, reflex sights have been used on firearms since World War I, with them being mounted on aircraft. Yet in 1945, reflex sights were small enough to be mounted on small arms. Portable weapons that are carried and used by an individual user. This was in the form of the Nidar shotgun sight. A crude reflex sight which uses a white image, and then with enough adequate light, such as sunlight, it would reflect a white dot. It is one of the earliest forms of reflex sight to be used on a small arm. Yet in any sort of conditions that are not bright, this sight would not be useful. So then we have other sorts of reflex sights out there that are powered either through electricity or through tritium, a radioactive material that glows and can be used to project light, or fiber optic. One of the first red dot sights, the single point OEG, is an occluded red dot reflex sight in which the image projected by the red dot would be just a red dot. However, the rest of the image would be black, and it's occluded, which means the operator must have both eyes be open, where the left eye or the non-shooting eye would see the background, while the right eye would see a black image with a red dot. However, combining both images from both eyes would result in a projected red dot image over a background. This was used in the late 1960s and was in use in limited numbers by United States Special Forces during the Vietnam War, such as the 1970 Son Tay raid. This sort of red dot sight is one of the first examples of red dot sight to be used on a firearm and is powered through either tritium or fiber optic. Okay, let's go get some confusion out of the way. Red dot sights are not to be confused with other low-powered magnified optics such as one-powered prisms or 124 or 126 powered variable zoom optics, and not to be confused with holographic sights. While red dot sights and holographic sights may look similar in appearance, such as this lead and steel red dot sight over here and this EOTech EXPS3 holographic sight, they're not the same. With holographic sights, they are a type of reflex sight, yes, that is true, but the image projected to the end user is done through a three-dimensional hologram with a laser, not a light-emitting diode with a single emitter projecting an image to the end user. Now, what difference does that make? Well, for the basic application of close-range reflexive shooting, using both eyes open to project an image, to view and facilitate a reticle or image to the operator with a holographic sight, and this three-dimensional holographic image powered by a laser, there is significantly lower battery life than that of a modern red dot sight. Another thing is that with a holographic sight, a type of reticle, there are other reticles out there or emitters out there, but the reticle in a holographic form means that in a three-dimensional plane, extremely resistant to parallax. With that, you can get a very, very, very crisp image, even for users that have severe eye problems like astigmatisms, in which looking through a holographic sight would feature a crisp one MOA dot with a ring around it. Someone with a severe astigmatism, when looking through a red dot sight, could view, like, say, multiple images, a smear, or some other serious problem instead of a crisp red dot sight. Another thing is that through a magnifier, a holographic sight is superior and retain the same sort of image and size compared to that of a red dot sight, which could have the dot be bloomed out or have some severe aberrations in comparison. But a holographic sight is not a red dot sight. Similarly, a one-powered prism sight is just a magnified prism sight, but just arranged in a way to have a very, very, very little zoom. However, you're looking through a series of lenses that magnify to a very little amount, but still an appreciable amount. Same thing with one-powered scopes or one-powered to, like say, 128 or 126 low-powered variable optics. Those are not red dot sights. And while a red dot sight can be used in tandem with a scope, such as this FIREARM's 128 with a Hollow Sun 509T pistol red dot sight, this particular optic is not a red dot sight. So I'm just trying to clear out some confusion. Okay, let's go talk about the applications of red dot sights. Red dot sights can be used in a wide variety of applications and types of firearm. Everything from 50 caliber heavy machine guns, such as with the M2 Browning, in conjunction with a Trigicon machine gun reflex sight, to extremely small carry compact pistols, such as a Smith & Wesson M&P 2.0 Shield Plus with a loophole Delta Point Micro. And with red dot sights being used on firearms, they offer several advantages. One advantage would be target focused shooting. Unlike iron sights, which require for it to be viewed at a single plane of existence, for most situations, most training and doctrine, have one eye focus on the front sight, everything else becomes blurry. That becomes a problem for target identification. Yet with a red dot sight with both eyes open and a target focus, you can clearly identify what the target is doing, and if you have effective hits on target. Much more easily than that of iron sights. Another advantage to having red dot sights would be low light shooting, in which it's projecting a bright image. Even in very, very, very dark situations or pitch black situations, a red dot sight can be used. Meanwhile, with iron sights that don't have any sort of, say, tritium or glow-in-the-dark or luminescent paint on it, using iron sights is very difficult. Same thing with a non-illuminated rifle scope. Yet with red dot sights in a low light setting, they are excellent for that. Another thing that is excellent with red dot sights is that they're very, very, very parallax resistant. What is parallax? Well, in different planes of distance, the way objects appear would shift around a little bit. This can be seen with like various FOV illusions, and this can impact how things are viewed at. If you're looking at say, an old school gauge or needle, and if you tilt your head left or right, it appears to be different. Same thing with red dot sights. Like, they're not parallax free. No optic is parallax free. While they're advertised to do so, there's still a little bit of parallax. Having just a dot appear even on the peripheries of the window can still be a viable sight picture when used. Another advantage of that is that since a red dot sight can be used in these sorts of situations where parallax can be a problem, they can facilitate great usage with awkward types of things, such as awkward barricade usage, awkward shooting positions, or that using night vision goggles when passively aiming without the aid of an external laser, or with that of a gas mask. A red dot sight is excellent for those uses and applications. Another advantage or use with a red dot sight would be that it has an unlimited eye relief. So with a traditional scope or prism scope, if your head is not in a perfect position, you'll see a scope shadow, and that means that you have a difficult time getting a good sight picture. But with a red dot sight, to maximize your field of vision, for most situations, mount the red dot sight as forward as you can on the firearm in a secure manner. So with many handguns, this will often be just on the rear of the handgun for clearance with a holster, or on an AR-15 pattern firearm over here, as far forward as you can on the upper receiver. Another advantage of red dot sights is that they're very robust. An Aimpoint Pro over here, such as this mounted on this rifle over here, is extremely robust and has survived even house fires, where Aimpoint has one in their collection where a user had lost their home in a fire, but the optic still functions and can still be mounted and zeroed on a firearm. That is pretty amazing. But red dot sights can be used in extremely bright environments, extremely dark environments, extremely hot environments, and extremely cold environments, or even underwater or subject to like severe pressure changes and shock. And red dot sights are extremely robust. And sure, people would claim that iron sights are very strong. Iron sights can still bend and fail and break, either from pistol sights, from them sliding out of the dovetail, or rifle sights breaking, or the adjustments or knobs breaking and having problems, stuff getting bent, or the attachment points fail. But red dot sights can still be a robust option. Also, red dot sights can be used as either a primary optic or sighting system, which is on this rifle over here, or can be used as a secondary sighting system, such as this pistol red dot sight mounted in conjunction with a low-powered variable optic. But those are the various applications of red dot sights. Over the qualities of red dot sight, with it being used in all lighting conditions, be quite robust, can be brought in action quickly with both eyes open, these are excellent options for close-range shooting. And for a home defense gun, or for a handgun, or for a backup sighting system for a long-range optic, I'd say these are the best use cases for a red dot sight. Now, what are some disadvantages of red dot sights? Well, red dot sights for the most part would need batteries to operate. It's a good idea to just replace batteries once a year and stock them up. Another disadvantage of red dot sights is that for someone who has an astigmatism, to perceive a red dot sight could lead to several problems. Like I mentioned earlier, a red dot sight could not appear as a crisp little dot, but could appear as a smear, could be appearing like an hourglass shape or a banana or comet or so, or could be appearing to the user as several different dots. Another disadvantage of red dot sights is that they're not as efficient for long-range shooting. So, without the aid of mattification, it'd be difficult to look at targets, and also with the dot appearing like a bit, even to some people, like having a bit of a halo or glow or a little bit of a problem, can make it a little bit difficult to serve as an aiming point or reference for the user in shooting longer range targets. Another thing is that for red dot sights, for them to be used, it requires a notch filter. What is a notch filter? A notch filter is just a certain filter to be used to isolate or reduce certain visual wavelengths to allow the red dot sight to be projected back to the user, or to isolate certain wavelengths or colors to have the red dot be used and projected and not provide so much battery drain. Which is why reflex sights and red dot sights often have a much longer battery life than that of a purpose-built mattified optic that is featuring an illuminated reticle powered by batteries. That's something to keep in mind. Yet, you can mitigate these short-range problems with that of a magnifier, but a magnifier also has some other issues as well. The notch filter and red dot sight, when viewed at through a magnifier, could magnify the blemishes or other problems, making target identification more difficult. Same thing is that if the reticle itself, like a 2mm dot, when trying to push out at further distances, could obscure the target altogether. So keep that in mind. Another issue with a red dot sight, this can be an issue with all optics, including holographic sights and magnified optics, is that when encountering a failure in which the mount itself would appear to hold up well, but the internal adjustments and dials are broken and malfunctioned, this is extremely bad, and you can have a zero be off without not even knowing about it until it's too late and after you shot. Another thing is that a red dot sight, it could be washed out against aiming at red targets. Similarly, other colors of reflex sights, such as an amber dot or a green dot sight, this can also be washed out as well. And in my own personal use, in my own personal vision, I don't have any sort of color blindness whatsoever. Using a green dot, to me, it washes out in several more environments, especially since vegetation is naturally green to me. But those are some identified issues with red dot sights. Same thing with cost. Having a extremely cheap red dot sight would lead to several other problems that with having a more expensive red dot sight, I'm not talking about an expensive red dot sight, but just something that is a bit more higher priced, these sorts of problems would not manifest themselves until we get to really, really cheap red dot sights. Okay, how are red dot sights mounted to firearms? Well, usually it's some sort of way or method to either mount on a Picatinny rail or 1913 rail. Picatinny is a bit of a misnomer, but I will not get into that in this video. Or be mounted on some sort of pistol red dot sight footprint. And there are several ways to achieve this that would mount into these sorts of mounting surfaces on firearms. For example, we have our 30mm tube. Various examples include the legacy Aimpoint 3000, Aimpoint 5000 series of red dot sights, going as far back as the early 90s, or it could be a single ring 30mm mount. Very popular with Aimpoints, so the Aimpoint Comp M2, the Aimpoint PRO, Patrol Rifle Optic, which we have mounted right now is this example, the Aimpoint Comp M4S, the SIG Romeo 7 reflex sight. This is a very popular mount, or it was until we got into smaller, more compact red dot sights, such as this red dot sight over here. This features an Aimpoint micromount. First seen on the Aimpoint T1, but has been widely adopted by other manufacturers, and very similar sights to this sort of footprint over here. This would include the Aimpoint T2, you have the Aimpoint Duty, you have the Holosun 403, the Holosun 503, the SIG Romeo 5, the SIG Romeo 4T Pro. And these feature a very common mounting pattern on the bottom of the optic, which could then be adapted to various different heights and configurations. Everything from low mounts for use on traditional hunting rifles, or it could be used on Kalashnikov rear sight replacements, or could be used in a very tall mount, such as the GBRS Hydra mount or the Unity mount. But these are becoming more and more popular now because of the red dot sights being smaller and more compact. Then you have proprietary mounts which use a direct mount to Picatinny. For example, the Lead and Steel LP1. I don't like this particular type of mount over here is because if I break the mount, the whole optic's screwed up. Meanwhile, for, say, the Aimpoint micro mount or the Aimpoint 30mm mount, if I break the mount over here, it's easy for me to find another one. But for a direct mount like this at Lead and Steel, if I break the mount, then the whole optic's screwed up. And that would be a severe problem. There are other optics footprints out there, such as a proprietary Holosun 510 type of footprint over here, which I think there's only one manufacturer that makes an aftermarket mount, ADM. There's also the Trijicon MRO mount, which is only for the Trijicon, but for those types of things, they're not very used. There's also weird type of tube mounts, such as the Cytron MD33X, which uses a 33mm tube, which good luck finding the aftermarket mount for, but I'm starting to ramble on to things that aren't very useful for the broad audience. The other category for mounting a red dot sight to a firearm would be a pistol mounting footprint. Several out there, and this could either be a direct mount in which the optic directly mounts to the mounting surface, such as this handgun slide over here on this Shadow Systems MR920 9mm pistol with a Holosun 507C, or it could be a plate system, which would mean that a intermediary plate would then mount to the pistol mounted footprint, such as on this low-powered variable optic in which we have a Holosun 509T, which uses an adapter to mount to an Trijicon RMR pattern pistol mount type of mount, which would then mount to a top ring on this PLX 30mm mount from Primary Arms. But for this sort of system where you have intermediary plates, this would include the Glock MOS system, the Walther plate system. These aren't as ideal as it provides bulk and height and could provide an additional point of failure. You have other types of mounting systems out there, like on the Smith & Wesson MP9 Shield Plus, we have a red dot sight that mounts directly to the dovetail of a rear sight on this Leupold double point micro. But for this is not in use and this is not a very good sight to me. I will not cover this particular sight in this video, but I'll do it on a separate video. But you have other systems in which a red dot sight would mount on the dovetail of rear sight, such as this particular mount over here, or it could be the Duick Defense mount. But otherwise, there are several different ways in which a red dot sight mounts to a firearm, but those are most popular ways and methods to do so. One thing to keep in mind is that when having the height of a red dot sight, a inline sort of stock over here, having a very low mount would make this rifle extremely difficult to, this firearm extremely difficult to use. But I've seen people would take an extremely high mount and put it on a traditional hunting rifle, like an AR-15 style mount on a low-powered variable optic on a hunting rifle, and they can't be able to get a good sight picture. Or the opposite, you have a very low mount mounted on an AR-15. Those are some mistakes to keep out for. One thing to keep in mind is that with pistol red dot sights is that the application of having a very small red dot sight that in its original use case was just a backup sight for a prism scope, such as for a Trijicon or Alcan scope. Once these started becoming robust enough for mounting on a red dot sight, they became very popular. The concept has been around since 2003, yet the application of it being pragmatic and useful and robust enough for daily carry and duty use has been since the early 2010s with the Trijicon RMR Type 2 reflex sight. And red dot sights have been mounted on pistols since probably very popular use was the Seymour red dot sight on competition 1911s. Yet for the practical widespread application of it for use in a compact duty holster or concealable holster hasn't been around since the early 2010s. Red dot sights can either have an open or closed emitter. What does that mean? Well, a closed emitter red dot sight, which is common on most red dot sights nowadays, at least for long guns, would have a front and rear lens. The whole system is sealed from the inside, which means that nothing will clog up the emitter except for manufacturing defects. There would be no sort of fog or other problems out there, and these are very common and robust for long guns nowadays. Another thing with a closed emitter red dot sight is that if the rear lens is smashed and destroyed, the front lens can still be used and would still be a usable optic. However, it'll have compromised durability and other sorts of problems. Open emitter red dot sights aren't used very often these days except for pistol red dot sights. A open emitter means that you only have a front lens and the emitter is exposed and out in the open. This can provide a lighter system out there, a more compact system out there, but with the emitter being exposed, that means that debris, rain, snow, other gunk can clog up the emitter and cause a failure in the red dot sight. And an open emitter red dot sight has been used more often in the past. Such examples would include the Meprolite reflex sight, could include the Seymour red dot sight for competition firearms, or it could be the Ultradot Pan AV and its horrible and widespread and prolific derivatives. Alternatively, open emitter red dot sights would be found on pistols, in which you have one plane of glass, and having two planes of glass could provide some problems with optical clarity. A single plane would make the sight more compact and lighter. However, some issues with this sight is that if it's used in exposed holster or if used in rain, I've had problems with this particular sight in which rain and other debris could fall on top of it and cause a failure in the optic, which I need to clear and clean out. Not a catastrophic failure, but a failure in operation. And for using a pistol red dot sight in an outboard application, so exposed and openly used on a long arm, for example, I prefer an enclosed emitter, such as the Holosun 509T, which has both a rear and front lens. There are other features out there, such as on SIG optics, where it's a open emitter reflex sight, which you can put a shroud on top of it. But I find those big gimmicks would cause fog and other problems. I wouldn't recommend using that sort of feature. There are some features out there to look out for a good red dot sight. The features I'd say to look out for would be durability, a high refresh rate, a battery life that lasts 1 year or longer, a small dot size, optical clarity, as well as night vision compatibility. Now, why are these features good and why look out for them? Let me explain. I'd say durability is a given, especially if you run a red dot sight as a primary sighting system, or I wouldn't recommend it your only sighting system. These red dot sights need to be robust for adverse conditions, as well as high round counts, as well as drops and other problems. And you might say, oh, I'll never drop my gun. Well, if you do happen to predict the future, go into the crypto market or the lottery or whatever. Because I don't know what's going to happen in the future. However, you need to prepare for events that may happen in the future, including firearms getting dropped or being roughly handled. And sure, some optics would trade durability for a larger window size. For example, the Legacy Seymour red dot sights, as well as the Trijicon SRO competition pistol red dot sight. These can handle high round counts. However, if dropped, they'd be a lot less durable than their other counterparts, like modern aimpoint sights or the Trijicon RMR. What about a high refresh rate? What does that mean? Well, high refresh rate means is that the dot will refresh at a very fast speed, which means that under very, very fast movement, which these red dot sights will be subject to, or looking through the reticle under recoil, you'll see a very smooth picture instead of a very jittery and choppy one. This is especially a problem when shooting at moving targets or very fast targets. Some older optics, some such as the Vortex reflex sights, as well as the Sightron or Tasco Japan family of optics, I wouldn't recommend because of these issues. Okay, what about small dot size? Well, the standard for a red dot sight, I'm talking about for the actual dot, not the size of the optic, but the actual dot, is 2 MOA for most long gun sights. Which means that if your eyes are perfect, That means you'll see at 100 yards away, the dot would appear to cover 2 inches of that target. Larger dot sizes, while they may be a bit faster to acquire, I would not recommend using them just because it would limit your ability to identify and shoot targets at further distances. And if you want to have a larger dot with a very small dot size or very small emitter, just crank up the brightness and bloom it out. Sure, it's at the cost of battery life, but you still retain that capability to shoot at further distances away. So for many pistol red dot sights, I would recommend like the two-way dots, a very fine chevron, like on the Holosun or AC or Primary Arms type of pistol red dot sights, or for something like a Trijicon RMR or an Aimpoint Acro, or no, not an Acro, yeah, an Aimpoint Acro. I'd recommend a 3 or 3.2 MOA, just as small as you can get. These very large red dot sizes are like 6 MOA or so, I'd say are way too big. Battery life of 1 year or more, pretty self-explanatory, and while optics are advertised to last for 1 year or longer, I'd say as a preventive measure, replace the batteries every once a year. But if you have an optic with a very, very, very short battery life, that eliminates one advantage of red dot sight that I failed to mention earlier, is that you can leave the red dot sight on for a very long time. This would mean that in a self-defense use, you can just, like for home defense or so, just grab the firearm and don't bother fiddling around with like switches or dials or anything like that. You just have the optic and set it to be good to go. Or with a very short battery life, that means the battery could shut off, and that means you would not have any sort of way to aim your weapon if it's your only sighting system, which is not good. But have an optic with an adequate battery life that would last for a year or longer. Ideally have it be advertised for a longer period of time, because if you're in a very bright or sunny environment, you may need to crank up your brightness, which would compromise battery life. Yes, some optics that are on the cheaper end of things may look horrible under night vision, but having a usable reticle under night vision is still, I'd say, an important feature. Especially if you're eventually going to go into night vision, you don't want to go and have to replace your entire fleet of optics. This might be a little bit of a tangent, but for the EOTech holographic sight over here, which has a much shorter battery life compared to its red dot counterparts, this particular one, the XPS2, I would not recommend this at all. It has the worst of both worlds of having a compromised battery life as well as the inability to shoot under night vision. And with these holographic sights, they're probably one of the best options out there for shooting passively under night, if the reticle isn't too bright and blooms it out. So optical clarity is important. Same with night vision, is that the more expensive red dot sights would have a greater optical clarity and better light transmission, which means you can be able to identify objects in the dark far more easily, especially in poor lighting conditions or through night vision. It's one of those things where it makes it a lot easier to shoot at targets, and even on a daytime setting, to be able to identify and be able to shoot targets at further distances. Another thing with durability of red dot sights is the durability of the mount, or the ability to find a new mount if the other one is compromised. For example, having a optic with an Aimpoint micro mounting platform means if you screw up the mount, you can find an easy replacement. But for other optics, such as this lead and steel one that has a direct mounting option, if you compromise and break up the mount, then the whole optic's screwed. So, what sort of red dot sights would I recommend for you, the viewer? I'd say if you're balling on a budget, the Holosun series of red dot sights are excellent for both long guns and pistols. The Holosun 403B, I'd say it's pretty good, but if you're looking for a red dot sight these days, the 403R. The outside body of this would have protruding shrouds which would protect the adjustment dial caps. So if the optic is dropped, then it would not as likely be colliding with the adjustment turrets and cause a critical catastrophic failure of the optic. The SIG Romeo 5, I'd say, is just as good as a Holosun 403. Get whatever's on a sale, but both of them are analogous to each other, similar battery life, same mounting platform, almost identical performance. Whatever you find on a sale. If you're going to look for a more expensive red dot sight to mount on a rifle, the SIG 4T Pro or 4XT Pro is quite good for what it is. It fulfills a similar role to the Aimpoint T2, yet has a cheaper price of about two-thirds the price of an Aimpoint T2. Features multiple reticles, and it seems to like superseded the Aimpoint T2 for that sort of role. The Aimpoint T2 is also a good option, and is considered the gold standard. Now, what about pistol red dot sights? I'd recommend the Holosun series of them. The Holosun 407C, the Holosun 507C. These are good. They're durable, they're robust, they have a good refresh rate. They're inexpensive, and I quite like them. I daily carried them. I've brought them through gun sight, through adverse conditions, and they hold up quite well. And if you're looking for an outboard secondary optic for a magnified optic, like a ACOG, a prism scope, or a low-powered variable optic, I would recommend an enclosed pistol red dot sight. And for that, the Holosun 509T. It's able to be mounted on the Trijicon RMR pistol red dot footprint, but is enclosed, and I like the durability and use of this with passive night vision use or as a day optic. I wouldn't recommend using these pistol red dot sights as a primary optic for a long gun, but for an application like this, I find it to be quite good. However, don't get any cheap mystery meat optics off of Amazon or AliExpress. These have terrible durability. These would fail, they would not hold zero, have a horrible refresh rate, and a waste of time. I keep seeing people buy these things and then they would break quickly, or they would try and mount it on a rifle at the beginning of a shooting session at the range. They couldn't get the rifle zeroed at all, then they'd take it off. It's a waste of your time, your money, and your ammunition. So don't bother with those. Other things that are worth mentioning would be the Aimpoint optics. They're great. A bit expensive for what they are compared to what you see else on the market these days, but they're pretty good. As well as the primary arms optics. I really like their reflex sights, their MD20. Their legacy sights were good, but the battery life on them are not what I would find to be adequate. But the SLX series of optics, or better, the GLX, those are quite good. But that's an honorable mention. Red dot sights that are good can be used in all lighting conditions and can be used for very fast reflexive shooting. They can be shot with both eyes and are excellent and second to none in close range shooting. But they could be used for longer distances, such as 200 yards, 300 yards, and for reflex sights in general, I was able to get unmagnified up to 410 yards away shooting at competitions. They're not as efficient as magnified optics for outside shooting or long distance shooting, but they're one of the most inexpensive sighting systems you can get for a firearm, and they're quite robust. They're also great for awkward shooting positions, and they're the best for using with night vision goggles. Besides a holographic sight, of course. But yeah, that's basically all the information I have for basic red dot sight usage. Otherwise, follow your manufacturer's directions, vet your equipment, and it's not a bad idea to invest yourself into a torque wrench in case you need to replace mounts or mount them to your firearm in a proper way. I have a very good one. I really like the Wheeler one. I'll put an affiliate link in the description down below. But also, none of this stuff would get you anywhere without proper training. Don't just throw money into things without having an idea what's going on, and have a good generalized setup first before moving to specialized stuff later. You can't go wrong with an 8.22, but if you're just starting out and you're at a limited budget, it may not be bad to look at one of these basic Holosons, for example. But don't waste money on garbage either. Don't buy mystery garbage from Amazon. But yes, if you do enjoy this video, go and hit that like button. If you don't, give it a dislike. Comment down below on what you think. Read the video description. If you'd like to support this channel, go and support my Ko-fi, or in the future, my Subscribe Star link, or some other subscription-based platform to help crowdfund and help support this channel. But the best way to support this channel is your patronage. Go engage with this video. Recommend this video and this channel, and subscribe and share. I really hate slop. It's useless, it doesn't do anyone good, and it just leads to unsafe and consumeristic behavior, which is something I'm trying to, with this channel, push away from. So please, I really appreciate your patronage and your support. And this video on Introduction to Red Dot Sights is brought to you by Glow So Bright. Thank you very much for watching. Let's see, any following notes and conclusions? Man, to be honest, YouTube isn't a very healthy platform for this genre of content. Either promotes garbage or it keeps on screwing with other people and their growth and engagement. I'd see a video just shoot up for engagement and then just level out quickly. And that's not just with me, it's like with Delta 34 and other content creators. And it's quite a headache. Maybe I should do some creativity in making a fake intro for the beginning just to have the AI algorithm be fooled. Because when I try the Google AI feature or the YouTube AI feature with the YouTube Premium, you can't get a very good summary of a video. But if I ask questions, the ones that are less open about it tend to be the ones that are more deplatformed or possibly demonetized in the future once this channel reaches monetization. So that's just an observation I have with this sort of format, with this sort of model. But more stuff will happen and will happen in the future. And I thank your patronage and your support.